Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. It is July the 8th, 2025, and this is America, Some Assembly Required. Thank you for coming. And today we're going to continue our talk regarding the Constitution of 1789 and how that applies to our international business assemblies. So last week we made it through section 1, and this week we're hopefully heading towards section 2. Anna has joined us, so I'm going to bring Anna on stage. So, hi Anna, how are you?
Good morning, Lisa.
I'm glad you could join us.
So, now I'm a little bit, I need to be caught up here, Lisa.
Okay.
Last week you went through the first section of the Constitution of the United States of America.
No, for the United States
Or
of
the
America.
United States.
Yeah, the 1787, correct.
Okay,
Yes.
right. Okay.
So
I just heard 1789, and so I was going.
No, 1787. Sorry. It's the for the United States. So, I've got a copy of it. I can share my screen.
Well, I'm trying to get my context down here because I'm having a hard time visualizing how that ties into our international business assemblies.
Well, as far as we, I thought it would be important for us to learn a little bit that 1787, so that as we move forward, we know how what business we're supposed to be dealing with, where the formation of the 1789 came from, how they took those concepts, and we'll be able to compare that then later for taking and looking at how they developed the 1789 Constitution, right? So we know where all those powers kind of derived from, what we gave to them, what we didn't give to them, what we kept. So all of those things, right? They all have bearing, correct?
Well, they do have bearing because they're in international jurisdiction, and that's a point that a lot of people miss, is that everything that has anything to do with the federal government is in international or global jurisdiction. It doesn't have a darn thing to do with our national jurisdiction. It's all 100% in international jurisdiction, and it's all being conducted by persons. It's not being conducted by the people, the living people. It's being conducted in the form of offices and officers. So everybody that works for the federal government is conducting themselves as an officer of some sort, either an elected officer, which we call an official, or an actual appointed or hired officer. Okay, so I think it's important for people that are dealing in international venues to realize that one of the principal venues is certainly the federal government, right? Because it's all international. But the International Business Committee of the states functions on its own, quite apart from its relationship to the federal government and the various powers of the federal government in international jurisdiction. So it's certainly fair for us to explore how the federal international delegated duties play into the relationship with the states and the states' international affairs. I just want to point out to people that this is not the only relationship or the only venue for the state international business assemblies. They're actually much more, the state international business assemblies have a lot more latitude and ability to address things above, beyond, and outside of the delegated powers. And the place where that really comes push to shove is the 10th Amendment, which fully admits that these powers exist and are retained by the states. So, in a sense, it's an exclusionary principle where the principal powers of the State International Business Assembly apply to enforcing the constitutions. Therefore, we need to know what the constitutions say, uh,
That's it.
but also to realize that the state business assemblies, the international business assemblies, have powers above and beyond and outside of the Constitution.
That's correct. And so my thought with this was to be able to introduce the Constitution of 1787 so that we can see what those delegated powers were, and then we can go on to talk about what the rest of the business of our International Business Assembly
Sure.
is, beyond that. So most people have not, I ask this question often. Have you ever read the Declaration of 1776, unanimous and they say no. Have you ever read the Northwest Ordinance? No. Have you ever read the Constitution for the United States? Oh, no. The Bill of Rights? Oh, no. Well, in order to do our international business, right, we have to
Right.
kind of have an idea about some of these things. It would help us a great deal in our assemblies to study those, because they're not only the basis of our public law, but they also are important to apply within our international business assemblies.
Right, because our international business assemblies have to enforce these service contracts. One of the things I'd kind of like to broadly observe is that, for example, we're reading the 1787 version, all right? The 1787 version is called the Federal Constitution, as if it were the only one, right? Because
Right.
it is the foundational document. It is the first Constitution. It's the Constitution that was adopted to address the land jurisdiction issues, because the federal Congress, the Congress that operated under this Constitution, was designed to address international land jurisdiction issues. And it was the American Federal Republic. So when you're looking at this, you're looking at the foundational document of the American Federal Republic, which was the American federal subcontractor that was charged with exercising our delegated powers as they exist in international jurisdiction. So think of this as the land constitution and the American subcontractor, and realize that this federal constitution, it is called the Federal Constitution, was the first constitution issued in 1787, and it is the basis of our federal republic. Everybody talks about the republic, the republic, the republic. Well, this is the basis of our federal republic that we're looking at right now. And the federal republic was charged with exercising certain enumerated delegated powers, particularly as they pertain to land and land assets and land jurisdiction issues within the international community. Now, there's a tendency for people to misunderstand the constitutions and to think that the constitutions are some sort of sacred cow. No, in fact, the constitutions created a subcontractor, an instrumentality of the American government that was set up from the very beginning to function for us and to do certain enumerated tasks for us. The constitutions are debt agreements that our states entered into with the subcontractors to provide these services. So these are service contracts, and they should be read as service contracts. These enumerated powers are attached to enumerated duties, and those enumerated duties are attached to enumerated services that they're supposed to provide us and that we're supposed to pay them for. And that's the essential of what this whole thing is about, is the relationship of the American government with its federal subcontractors.
Right, right. So, how would you like? Last week I kind of read a section, discussed it a little bit, and then moved on. Would that be okay with you today?
Sure, and this is an important section for everybody right now because we're going through all this discussion about Donald Trump and the powers vested in his administration. This is perfect.
Great. So, this is Article 2, Section 1. The executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during the term of 4 years, and together with the vice president chosen for the same term, be elected as follows. Each state shall appoint in such manner as a legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in the Congress, but no senator or representative or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed an elector. The elector shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for 2 persons, of whom one at least shall not be an inhabitant of the same state with themselves. And they shall make a list of all persons voted for, and of the number of votes for each, which list they shall sign and certify and transmit sealed to the seat of government of the United States, directed to the President of the Senate. The President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all the certificates, and votes shall then be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes shall be the president. If such number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed, and if there be more than one who have such majority and have an equal number of votes, then the House of Representatives shall immediately choose by ballot one of them for president. And if no person have a majority, then from the 5 highest on the list, the said House shall in like manner choose the president. But in choosing the president, the votes shall be taken by states, the representation from each state having 1 vote. A quorum for this purpose shall consist of a member or members from 2/3 of the states, and a majority of all the states shall be necessary to a choice. In every case, after the choice of the president, the person having the greatest number of votes of electors shall be the vice president. But if there should remain 2 or more who have equal votes, the Senate shall choose them by ballot, the vice president. And this is modified by the 12th Amendment.
Right. This is a significantly different process than what goes on today. And what you're looking at here is the Electoral College. This is how they are determining the electors that actually cast the ballots that result in electing a president or a vice president. So nowadays we have political parties. The political parties run the president and vice president together as a set. And this is done so that they make sure that the people who are working in these positions can work together and choose to work together and like each other and, have met eye to eye.
Sort of like each other, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Right. There are some odd marriages like Donald Trump and Michael Pence, for example.
Yes.
But that's the theory behind it anyway, is that they get to choose their running mate. you can see from this that it's really quite an involved process to elect a president. And you can see also that there are some changes in the conventions, the styles by which we name things. Um, at this time in our history, when this was adopted in 1787, there was no distinction between the United States of America, what we think of as the United States of America, and the British Territorial Corporation calling itself the United States of America. It wasn't even thought about in those terms. And so when you're looking at this, what you're seeing is how people in 1787 conceived of the structure of government they were creating. And there was no doubt in their minds that when they were talking about the United States of America, they were talking about what we conceive of as the Federal Republic.
Mm-hmm.
They were not confused. We are confused.
Totally
After the fact. Yes, we're confused after the fact because they knew that they were contracting for services. And that's a fundamental knowledge that most of us lack when we look at the constitutions. We just try to go in and look at the constitutions in a vacuum, devoid of context. But the constitutions are actually the implementation of the peace treaties. Remember, at the time, we had just gone through this incredible peace process that had taken 4 years from the time that the British surrendered at Yorktown to when we actually began the implementation of the treaties that came out of the peace process. These service contracts and these delegations of power, this power sharing that we're undergoing here, was set up deliberately in the way that it is so that the powers that were at odds with each other could come together and work together. And so we have the American subcontractor, we have the British territorial subcontractor, call it the Tory subcontractor, and then we have the Holy Roman Empire subcontractor. This first constitution is for the American subcontractor, but the people at the time understood that they were contracting for services, which is something that we don't even think about today.
That's right. Most people have the impression that they're under the Constitution when they're not, that the people who work for us are actually under the Constitution.
Right. This is their contract. This is their work contract. And it defines, the structure of their offices, and, it also defines what their enumerated powers and duties are going to be. But we get kind of lost in the old, antiquated verbiage, the way that the thing is worded, and we miss the content. Okay,
Right.
we tend to think of it. Oh, enumerated powers. These are the powers that the federal government has over us. No, the powers have to be delegated to the government, the federal government, because the duties are being delegated to the federal government. We're handing them a portion of our work.
It would be like me turning around and saying to my next door neighbor, "Hey, I'm gonna have you start cutting my grass for me, right?"
Right.
And instead of me cutting my own grass, I pass that task on to my neighbor, and that's kind of the agreement. And my neighbor goes, "Well, what exactly are the details of that? Can I use your lawn, or am I only just cutting the lawn?" Right?
Exactly. When you empower someone to do something for you, you also have to enable them to do it. And so the enabling is the transfer of the power to do it for you. But the actual essence of the relationship is that they're under contract to serve you and to do this particular duty for you, and that's why you empower them to do it.
Right. Exactly. Okay, so let's continue on. The Congress may determine the time of choosing the electors and the day on which they shall give their votes, which day shall be the same throughout the United States. No person except a natural born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall be eligible to the office of President. Neither shall any person be eligible to that office who shall not have attained to the age of 35 years and been 14 years a resident within the United States. I love how they keep capitalizing the word person, Anna.
Yes, because they knew something that we don't know anymore, and that is that this is an officer, an official, an elected official, as we were just discussing, operating in international jurisdiction. So, could you flip back to
Sure.
that paragraph just for a second? And okay, so a natural born citizen. Okay, what does this mean? They're talking about the people, the state citizens, okay, who have accepted their responsibility upon reaching the age of 21 to be a citizen. Okay, so that's a natural born citizen, someone born on our land, on our soil. And it says, or a citizen of the United States. Now, just a moment. What does this mean? You know, how does one become what's the difference between a natural born citizen and a citizen of the United States? And why does this have a capital C on it when today we are only familiar with a small c citizen of the United States? What happened? This is important. Um, when we're talking about we the people, everybody always sees that there's a capital P and everyone's confused about this. Well, here's the essence of it right here. No person, meaning a lawful person, one of the people with a capital P, except a natural born citizen, someone who's been born in this country on our land and soil, and who has chosen to accept the responsibility of state citizenship. This is what we're talking about here. Natural born citizen, okay? Or a citizen of the United States. Okay, so what is a capital C citizen of the United States? When you go back and research this, you find that in our first naturalization and immigration law, there is a special kind of citizenship that an American could undertake. And that is this citizenship here, citizen of the United States with a capital C, which you could be an ASN, what we now call an ASN, and you could elect by a process that was set forth in the first Naturalization and Immigration Act to become essentially a federal citizen. Okay. And it was a lengthy process. It took like 3 years. You had to declare it. You had to have a good character. You had to be educated. You had to have all these different things in line, and you had to apply to be a citizen of the United States. And you went through this entire process that was stipulated in order to become a citizen of the United States. So this is a different kind of citizenry and a different kind of citizen than we ever encounter in the modern era, specifically because this is the form of citizenship of the Federal Republic, the vanished Federal Republic. So you could either become a natural born citizen by electing to serve your state in that capacity, or you could become a citizen of the United States by electing to, directly engage this process under the Naturalization Act. And we never know or hear about this anymore, and we don't understand this passage of this particular article because we don't have citizens of the United States with a capital C anymore. I just wanted people to notice that and realize what it's actually talking about and know where to look to find out about citizen of the United States as it's used in this context. It's a very important little piece of information because it opens up your eyes in terms of what the Federal Republic was and how it operated and why it was set up the way it was. And it says at the time of the adoption of this Constitution, they still didn't know exactly when this was going to be adopted, did they?
No.
They were working at it. This was a work in progress document, and it came up and it was adopted faster than anyone expected it to be. And I think that, see, it says, and been 14 years a resident within the United States. So again, what are they talking about here? We're not talking about a residency in the sense that, again, we're looking at citizen of the United States, 14 years of resident within the United States. We're talking about the Federal Republic. We're not talking about the United States that we think of as the municipal government. We're
Right.
thinking about the Federal Republic as a separate jurisdiction and a separate rulership within the country. So if you were a resident of the United States and were a citizen of the United States, as it is used in this paragraph, you would be talking about being a citizen of the Federal Republic, which is clearly operating as the United States, and you would have left your state where you were born and raised. You would have left the jurisdiction of that state and that nation state and would have willfully transferred into the federal jurisdiction controlled by the Federal Republic, which is, again, international in nature. And you would have been so for 14 years. So you could be a natural born state citizen and you could apply to be president of the United States, right? Or you could be a citizen of the United States, having made that choice and having emigrated into that international status for a period of 14 years. So you would have to be in that special citizenship category, having chosen it and having immigrated into it for a period of 14 years before you could actually run for president.
Yeah, that's very interesting because if you do the math on that, 1787 minus 14 years would take you back to 1773. Now, wouldn't it?
Yes, it
So-
would. And if you think about it in terms of the election cycle, it gives you exactly 3 election cycles. So you would have to have been involved in the Federal Republic and would have to be aware of the work and the nature of the Federal Republic and actually living within those structures for a period of 14 years before you would be naturalized to the extent that you could serve as president of the Federal Republic. We're talking here now about the office of the President of the Federal Republic.
Right. Okay.
Have we covered the fact that a president is a business office?
Not yet.
Yes, well, this is important to learn and to keep in mind. The president is the chief executive officer of a company or corporation. It's not a head of state. It functions as head of state for us in international jurisdiction, but it is not the head of state.
Could you define a little bit more for people what the head of state actually is, Anna, to make the distinction?
Okay. For example, Queen Elizabeth II was recognized as both the sovereign and the head of state. And these are offices. This is like the mayor or the chief of police, or these are offices. And when you occupy an office, you are operating as a person in a specific jurisdiction, and you have a specific role. The President of the United States that we're talking about here is the president, the chief executive officer, the chief cheese and business administrator of the federal republic that we are forming using this document. All right. But the head of state would be the president of, would in effect be the not the president, but would be the person occupying the executive office for the entire country and all of the presidents and all of the people. The head of state is the one who operates the jurisdictions, the land, the water jurisdictions of the sea and maritime, and the relationship to the air jurisdiction. All of those things come to the head of state by virtue of entirely different parameters than what we're seeing here that are set out as the clear requirements of office. Thou shalt be 35 years old. You shall have been a resident within the United States for 14 years if you're going to be considered for this particular office. So our state citizens can come in and be elected to the office of the president we're discussing here. And bear in mind, there are multiple offices of president. Okay, this is just one.
Right.
Right? So when you're looking at this, you're looking at one of our state citizens must have been a resident within the District of Columbia for 14 years, or must have chosen to be a citizen of the United States and adopted that status and been resident for a period of 14 years. See, it's a lot more intense. And the head of state would be a person who, by virtue of their interest in the country as a whole, would then be operating to, say, countersign peace treaties on behalf of the people, the actual owners, as opposed to the administrators. You might have a peace treaty that is signed by the President of the United States, acting as the CEO of the business, but then you would have it countersigned by the head of state, approving it on behalf of the people. So you've got these two things going on at the same time. You've got the people of the American government, and you have the CEO of the business that we're setting up here.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. So we're going to move on. And the next is, in case of the removal of the president from office or his death, resignation, or inability to discharge the powers and duties of the said office, the same shall devolve on the vice president, and Congress may by law provide for the case of removal, death, resignation, or inability both of the president and the vice president, declaring what officer shall then act as president, and such officer shall act accordingly until disability be removed or a president shall be elected. And that was also modified by the 25th Amendment. So
right, and then this is the point where we start talking about the Speaker of the House being the replacement in the event that the President and Vice President are both rendered unable to fulfill their office as a result of death, resignation, or inability. Um, the rate things are going, we should go a few deeper than that. But
the thing that always comes to mind when I read this is Al Haig making his declaration during the Reagan administration. I'm in charge. When he wasn't, he kind of bypassed a couple people.
right,
So,
and it's interesting to me that they've pretended to modify this document by amendment, because actually this document has not been amended and hasn't even been. This is a dormant constitution that hasn't been active since the Federal Republic went dark in 1861. So when they say modified by amendment, they're trying to make you aware that things have changed in the way that they're done now. But this actual document has not been amended.
no.
This actual document is as is since 1787, or as is from 1861, I should say, and has not been modified by the 25th Amendment. In fact, it hasn't been modified since it has different amendments than the other constitutions, and far fewer amendments than the other constitutions as a result of having been dormant all those years.
Okay. The president shall at stated times receive for his services a compensation, which shall neither be increased nor diminished during the period for which he shall have been elected, and he shall not receive within that period any other emolument from the United States or any of them. Who's the any of them?
The states, the individual states. You have to understand the concept of federation and confederation. A federation operates as all the several states, all the different individual states as states operating in their own separate capacity. Okay, so this is where you see roll call votes, and this is where you see objective balloting among the states, such as went on when the Declaration of Independence was adopted. Okay, this is a federation is when you have the individual several states acting as individual states to vote and control and make decisions for their state individually. A confederation is when they've all come to an agreement prior that allows them to act as one unit. And this is called mutually shared powers. And this is when they act as a confederation, which is when all of these states basically donate a power or powers to a single authority, and then that authority acts for them. So what you're looking at here is a reference to that. The United States, the Federal Republic, in other words, gives the president a fee for his services, a compensation. And that's coming from all the states, and they're all acting as a confederation to pay the president. But it's conceivable that a individual state that's a member of the United States, that has representation in the Federal Republic, right? Say Massachusetts might take it into its head to give the president a new car.
Just a little on the side.
Right. And thereby try to get some favor from the president's office. And so they're precluding this kind of bribery, basically, from going on, either collectively as a group, trying to in some way moderate the president's good judgment in his office, or for any several of them or one of them to come forward and try the same thing. They're just kind of saying, Nope, you don't get to bribe the president about anything. He gets to go about his business and use his own good judgment without that kind of prejudicial input.
Right. Okay. Before he enter on the execution of his office, he shall take the following oath or affirmation. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Well, what are we talking about here? Because we, in our discussions, talk about a Constitution of the United States, but this is a different Constitution of the United States, isn't it? This is the Constitution of the Federal Republic, which is doing business as the, with a small THE, United States. Correct?
Right.
So this is a different, earlier interpretation of what the Constitution of the United States is. What we have called the Constitution of the United States, the remainder, is what was seized upon in 1871. Okay, so this started out as an independent American subcontractor doing business as the United States, right, under this Constitution. And yet, over the years, the verbiage, the United States, as you see it here in the Constitution of the United States, has been taken over by the other federal subcontractors. They claimed to own all of the corporations, names, contracts, and assets of the Federal Republic that was doing business as the United States, as you see it here. And they've been running it as a municipal corporation ever since. So this particular Constitution and the authorities vested in it and the contracting abilities and everything else that were invested in it was commandeered in 1871. And that's why we keep seeing it as the Constitution of the United States, even though it's a completely different organization running it.
Right. That's right. Okay, Section 2. The President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called into the actual service of the United States. He may require the opinion in writing of the principal officer in each of the executive departments upon any subject relating to the duties of their respective offices. And he shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. He shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur, and he shall nominate and with the advice and consent of the Senate shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for, and which shall be established by law, but the Congress may by law vest the appointment of such inferior officers as they think proper in the President alone, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments. It's pretty clear.
Okay, well, I would like to comment on that section before we go on.
Please.
Okay. This is an essential sub-office, if you will, or duty of the President of the Federal Republic. So when they commandeered the Federal Republic, they commandeered a great deal more than just a bureaucratic business office. They also commandeered the leadership of the Army and Navy. But what is it? It's the Army and Navy of the United States, meaning the Federal Republic, meaning the subcontractor of the American government. So over the years, there's been a change here that has come about since the 1870s, where it started out as Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States, meaning the Federal Republic that was carrying our delegated powers in international jurisdiction, right? But there was also an American Army and Navy of the several states. And what this is providing for is that if the country were actually under attack and we needed to defend our borders and defend our states, then the president, acting as commander-in-chief of the jointly funded Army and Navy, and this is a professional funded Army and Navy, this is not an army of volunteers at this point. This is the pros that are on standby all the time and that are under constant payroll, okay? And the militia of the several states, meaning our guys, the home guard, so to speak, that maintain the security of the individual states. All right? And what's missing here are all the volunteers that can be conscripted or enrolled or they call it inducted into the armed services of the United States during time of war. So bear in mind that you have the professional Army and Navy, which is under constant payroll of the Federal Republic in this case, and the president, who is the commander-in-chief of theirs, right? And then he has the ability to call upon the militia of the several states. Okay, and we know what the militia of the several states are, right? Because each state has its own militia.
Right.
But it's not talking about at any point about all the people that may volunteer to be inducted into the Army and Navy of the United States at time of war. So keep that in the back of your mind that there are two separate groups here and one additional group that isn't even being talked about. And the president, as commander-in-chief of the professional Army and Navy of the United States, can call upon the militia of the several states, but in actual fact, what happens is that he also calls upon the general populace of the country to step forward and volunteer to serve in the professional Army and Navy of the United States. And that's where the predominant influx of people staffing the Army and Navy of the United States comes from. And one of the big problems we've had in this country is that they have not always honored this ability to call up, they call it calling up, the reserves and volunteers. They haven't always honored that process, and they haven't always been forthcoming in disclosing the nature of the work and the contract that people sign when they are inducted. They've also played very fast and loose with drafting Americans, average Americans, and forcing them, basically conscripting them into the Army or press ganging them into the Navy, which they absolutely have no power or authority to do. As you can see right here, the power of the president is limited, and his ability is limited to calling up the militias of the several states. Okay? He does not have the ability to command volunteers. He cannot force you to volunteer and sign up for, say, selective service.
Right.
the draft. You
And
do
it's
not
also and it's also predicated, Anna, on the fact that there has to be a declared war
right,
for that to occur. Right?
right. But in any case, he can't force you to serve.
No. Okay. All right. So section 3. He shall from time to time give to the Congress information of the state of the Union and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. He may, on extraordinary occasions, convene both houses, or either of them, and in case of disagreement between them with respect to the time of adjournment, he may adjourn them to such time as he shall think proper. He shall receive ambassadors and other public ministers. He shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and shall commission all the officers of the United States.
Okay, so again, we're talking about the Federal Republic, which is the American subcontractor of the American government. Okay, this is a direct instrumentality that's being managed by the states of America as a confederation. So we're talking about the president of the Federal Republic. And so when they're talking about the State of the Union, they're not talking about the Union States. They're talking about the republics, the state republics that were formed when this federal republic was formed. And we still hear about the state republics. You hear about the Republic of Texas and you hear about the Texas Republic, both. And this becomes very confusing, especially in Texas, because the people remember this. But at the time, we had the Republic of Massachusetts and the Massachusetts Republic. And we had the Florida Republic and the Republic of Florida. And all of this underlying state level mechanism and these organizations were having their input into the Federal Republic. So they were actually the members at the state level supporting and directing the activities of the Federal Republic. These were the states of the Union that they were talking about because the delegated and the undelegated powers were being separated out. And so you had this entire bureaucracy that was designed to guide the activities of the Federal Republic exercising the delegated powers. We no longer have that because this particular 1787 Constitution, the federal Constitution, has been dormant since 1861. As a result, all of the state republics and republics of have gone dormant too. But this is a big confusion for a lot of Americans who they remember having a republic vaguely, and they run across references to, the Republic of Massachusetts. And this is where it comes from. These were state level members that were giving input to the Federal Republic. And if you look at the construct of the language, you'll see that there are two in every state. There's a Texas Republic that dealt with land jurisdiction issues and gave their vote to the Federal Republic. And then you have the Republic of Texas, right, that gave its vote concerning sea jurisdiction issues and forwarded on to the Republic, the Federal Republic. So they had a voting mechanism and they had a means of consulting at the state level for the things that the Federal Republic was doing. And that's what it was. But, we're never taught that, and we're never shown that. We're just left with these vestigial references and historical documents to state republics, which vanished out of thin air, just vanished. And we're left to go,
Now what?
well, and what does this mean? You look around and you don't see a Republic of Wisconsin anymore, do you?
No.
You don't see the Wisconsin Republic is long gone, and yet you find references to these organizations, and you wonder what was going on. Well, this is what was going on. We had the Federal Republic exercising our delegated powers, and there had to be a state level organization organized to advise the Federal Republic. That's what all the state level organizations were. Once the Federal Republic went dormant, all the state organizations did too.
Right. They lost their quorum.
Well, they not only lost their quorum. This is not the organization that lost the quorum. The organization that lost the quorum was the States of America,
Right.
our confederation, which was holding the contract.
Right.
So the States of America was holding the contract for all of this work, and they went dormant for lack of a quorum to conduct business, which then meant that the federal subcontractor had to shut down also because they were not the ones holding the contract, and they did not have the approval and the input of their employer anymore.
Right.
So
it's the trickle down effect in a way.
Yes, the
When
federal,
it all unravels.
exactly. The confederation operating as the States of America could no longer function because it didn't have a quorum. Therefore, they could no longer direct the operations of the Federal Republic. The Federal Republic went into limbo and kind of limped along and took directions from the, as we shall see, the British Territorial U.S. Congress for a period of years. And then finally, the same British Territorial Congress, without any due notice to the American public, said, oh, well, we guess that the Federal Republic has been abandoned by the actual owners. And so we're going to claim that it's abandoned, and we're going to claim all of its assets and contracts and names and everything for ourselves. And this is where the Brits snuck in the back door and commandeered, under false pretenses, the American Federal Republic and turned it into its version of the United States under its dominion and its direction instead of American direction.
Okay. All right. Section 4. The President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors.
Okay. Well, let's take a moment here and consider that they're making a distinction between civil office and military office.
Mm-hmm.
The military office of Commander-in-Chief comes under military law. Nowadays, that's the Universal Code of Military Justice, right? But these are civilian offices here, and they're part of the civil government, what we think of the Federal Civil Service. Okay? So all of these people that work for the United States as a business enterprise can be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of, must be convicted of it, treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. So this gives you the sort of the teeth in the contract of of what you can be accused of and what you can be removed from office for in the civilian world. Doesn't say a word about what happens to the commander-in-chief office, for example, in the military side of it. So that's a separate topic, and it's all handled under international law. It's not handled by the Constitution.
Right. Okay. Well, I know I see we've got a couple of questions, so we're right at an hour, and I'd like to be able to take a couple questions if that's okay, and then we'll pick up here next week. How's that?
Sounds great.
Okay. So let me go to the questions here in the chat. Let's see here. So I'm going to show this. So this is from Dorothea Stridham on, she's on Africa. Question, does the British control all the laws like Constitution?
No, but what they managed to commandeer was the organization that was applying the laws. It would be like a corporate takeover. You've got a corporation that is an American corporation, it's staffed by Americans, and it's under American control. And suddenly the British walk in the back door and they take control of the presidency and the offices of that corporation, like a hostile takeover. Okay. So now instead of Americans having control of the United States company or corporation or federal republic, if you will, the entity that's been hired to exercise our delegated powers has now been commandeered by a foreign power. And that foreign power was the British territorial government coming in and making a false claim of abandonment without due notice to the American public that actually owned the Federal Republic and the offices and the names and everything else about it. So it's like a hostile takeover. And they accomplished this very secretly and very, they didn't publish notice of any of this outside the District of Columbia, full well knowing that the actual owners, the Americans, were outside the District of Columbia. So it was an insider deal where this false claim was made, and the Americans were not given any kind of warning that this was happening, and didn't have the opportunity to come forward and say, no, the Federal Republic isn't abandoned, and yes, we are getting our poop in a group to restore the Confederation, the States of America, which will then allow the Federal Republic to resume operations. It's similar to what we're going through right now, where they were all prepared to make a claim on abandonment concerning our entire country. But we got wind of it and raised our hands and said, to hell you beller. But anyway, they did manage to subsume or commandeer or whatever word you want to use, essentially a hostile takeover of the management of our Federal Republic.
I think it's important that in this question, first of all, that we realize that in that time period, our world here in our country was in shambles. Our government was kind of in shambles. Our land was in shambles. Everything was just, the Civil War just tore all kinds of things, including families, apart.
Yes.
And so communication was very difficult. And they used that lack of communication to be able to put this into place, because the communication at that time would have been very local, and it would not have been spread out widespread. And we also have to remember that many of the people out there didn't read, So they depended on that communication, word of mouth kinds of things to be able to get their news. So
Right.
they use that confusion and the lack of communication to their advantage to do these things without full disclosure, right?
Right. They did not give notice. They did not give full disclosure. They did not make the effort to contact the American public, who were the actual owners of the American Federal Republic. They came in and they latched onto it, and they basically stole the assets of the American Federal Republic and then used it as if it were continuing to be the American Federal Republic when in fact it had been taken over by the Brits. And this was a grave breach of trust and violation of their contract, which requires them to act in good faith. So they did not act in good faith. They acted in gross breach of trust. They latched on to American assets which had not been abandoned by the Americans, and they did so in such a way that they kept it secret from the Americans for the next 160 years. And it was only when they were getting prepared to make the same kind of false claim on abandonment and basically proposed to give away the assets of our entire country to their creditors to pay their debts that we, suddenly came awake and said, hey, enough of this. We're not putting up with it anymore. We're not absent. We're not an interregnum. And the fact that our American subcontractors ceased functioning is none of your business. We get to decide who's going to mow our lawn or not, and we get the opportunity to mow our own lawn if we please. And thank you very much. We are the sovereign government. So just get your glommy British paws off our property and out of our business. Okay, so this is where we're at right now, is that we caught them in a very evil intent toward our country, even worse than what they pulled off in 1871. And we've brought it forward and we are prosecuting them for it.
Right. So, one of the things also, Dorothea, what you have to, and everybody kind of gets confused, is that Constitution is a contract from the people to the service providers.
Right.
So it is we are the other side of that contract. And here in the States, there's been lots of talk over the last many years about, we're going to have a constitutional convention. And it's like, you and what army? Because the people are not necessarily there representing the people. So they're only one half of the contract holders are actually there to even negotiate any kind of changes to the Constitution.
Right.
So anything that they've done, they do within their corporation, but they're not really doing that within the original intent or the original holders of the Constitution, the people. So, we get this confused often, and I hear it often, and it's like, not exactly, because that has to be between the people and the corporation, not within the corporation itself.
Right. And we also have the same thing going on at the state level. We're supposed to have confederate states that are called states of states, okay? And these are the entities that actually fought the so-called American Civil War. It wasn't the states that fought the Civil War. It's misrepresented to us as if it were the actual states that fought the Civil War, but instead it was the business entities hired by our states to conduct routine business for us, the states of states that fought the Civil War. And that is part of the reason that we can be sure that the quote unquote Civil War was in fact a commercial mercenary conflict and not a war. And that also underlines the fact that it was not declared by any Congress and it was not subjected to any official peace treaty. So we know for a fact that the American Civil War wasn't a war. It was a mercenary conflict. It was illegal as hell. And we have the proof that it was illegal. So the fundamental basis of all of the presumptions going forward is flawed by fraud and falsehood from the very beginning, because the assumptions and the law that pertains going forward as military law never applied.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Great. Great. So here's another interesting question from Betty Gillespie. Is the Treaty of Paris 1783 equal to a sea treaty? Is the Treaty of Ghent equal to a land treaty? What treaty is the global treaty?
The Treaty of Paris 1783 is indeed a sea treaty. How very perceptive of you. Most people miss that entirely, and they think that the United States of America being mentioned in that treaty, they assume that it has to be the Federation of States. But no, in fact, it's the British Territorial Company that was formed prior to the Revolution that is making a peace treaty with us. Okay, and so that's why you see the King of England being named as the Arch Treasurer and Prince of the United States of America, which is very confusing for people until they realize that they're talking about a company, a British territorial company, merely calling itself the United States of America, and not what we think of as the United States of America, our Federation of States. So no, he was never the arch treasurer, and he was not the elector, and he was not the prince of our Federation of States. He was the arch treasurer and elector and prince of a British territorial company calling itself the United States of America. So that's what that is about. Them making peace with us over the what they call the War of Independence and what we call the Revolution. The Treaty of Ghent is not a land treaty, it's a commercial treaty. It's where the Belgian government and all of its various tentacles say, okay, well, we'll do business with you, and we will honor land jurisdiction commercial contracts. Okay, so it's land jurisdiction in the sense that it's land-based commerce, all right? But it's not, generally speaking, a land treaty in that it does not address land assets, unless you want to consider that commercial businesses that operate on land are land assets. It's talking about the interface between land and air. You see, you can conduct commerce either on the sea or on the land. Both can operate and connect to the air jurisdiction, which is the jurisdiction of commerce. So this is the jurisdiction of commerce that we hardly ever use anymore because of all this other stuff that connects from the land to the air. So this is actual commerce as people understood it at that time, as opposed to maritime commerce taking place on the sea. And this is what the governing fundamentals, the treaty that says, yes, we welcome you into the international community, and yes, we will honor your participation as a sovereign nation having commercial activities on the land. Okay. The global treaty is talking about the ecumenical and ecclesiastical treaties, where you're talking about the global estate trust and the acceptance of the Holy Roman Empire and all the other global entities, like the post office is global. So the postal treaties are global treaties, and there's more than one global treaty as a result. but say we have our global treaty with the UPU to provide postal service in this country.
Right. Right. Okay. Well, I know there's a couple other little questions in the chat, but I think we'll be answering those very soon with more teaching. So I don't want to really get into them before we have a chance to really lay the framework out and work our way through it. So so stay tuned, and hopefully one of these days we'll get to those topics of exactly how we do elections and what we're electing, and how we work with those subcontractors and things as we go through this process of international business. So Anna, we're pretty much down to the end. So we're gonna stop right here, and next week we're gonna pick up with the next section, and then we'll move forward.
Oh no, we couldn't possibly do that, Lisa.
Of course we can. I'm all about moving forward, right? So, yep. All right.
We're done, guys.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you coming and spending time with us today. And we'll say goodbye to everybody until next Tuesday.